Okay, welcome everyone. We want to invite you to the Empathy Circle Facilitator training, and we have a slide deck here that we're going to share. Let me bring that up. So this is our Empathy Circle Facilitator training that is hosted by the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, which you can find at cultureofempathy.com, as well as and also by the Empathy Tent, which you can find at empathytent.com. And this is an invitation if you're a viewer, watching this on YouTube or on Facebook or on social media. We invite you to take part in an empathy circles for bridging social and political divides, as well as you can actually take part in future versions of this or different presentations on the facilitation and become an empathy circle facilitator. And there's information about how to take part and get involved at empathycircle.com. And this is our Empathy Circle Facilitator Training, Module 1. And we have 4 sessions. And the sessions are Empathy Circles, What, Why, How. This number 2 is the speaker role. The 3rd one is the reflective listener role. And number 4 is what this session is the facilitator role. So do you want me to continue, or do you want to take it over?
I can just say a little thing too about that at this time, we don't have any training on the organizer producer role. There's some information on the website about it, but we're not sure if we're going to do that training or if we're just going to have information on the web. So do you want me to go ahead and go?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm Ingrid Sather, and this is kind of a test with this facilitation training. And Edwin, let's see, you can go, today's going to be a little bit, about 2 hours. It's probably going to be shy of that a little bit. And after the first hour, it'd be nice if we just kind of stand up and stretch. So if sometimes I may forget to do that. But if one of you remembers to do it and I don't, if you could say, if you see a good time to stop and do it, that would be great. So let's see, let's look at, I think everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but we just want to talk a little bit about, if you can just note what these questions are. And then, yeah, Edwin has us back, and we'll kind of just do round robin, share a little bit about why you want to be an empathy circle facilitator and what topics interest you about it. And Nancy, do you want to go first?
Sure. So do I just talk in general to the group? Yep. Okay. So I think just part of my my passion for understanding and communicating with people kind of draws me to the empathy facilitator work and the empathy circles. And so I think that people always surprise us, and sometimes just, I don't know, we can learn so much from what people say and share and how they act and interact with other people. And I just find that intriguing and interesting. So as a facilitator, it allows me a chance to help a group of people communicate and do a better job of communicating through the reflective listening. And so I think that I find interesting and intriguing. And I think the areas where I'm most interested are usually the personal or social issues. Although, as I mentioned in my notes, I do like the environmental issues as well.
Okay, thanks. Jessica, do you want to go?
Sure, thanks, Ingrid. For me, it's because I want, this combining empathy and facilitation is awesome for me, because I love facilitation and I want to grow there. And I do believe empathy is a great tool to eradicate dehumanization, creating better awareness, reducing violence, etc., etc. And so it's awesome to be able to combine the two. My topics are as well very much environmental. I would really want to find a way to help environmental activists who might be burnt out, and I think Empathy Circle can really help to unload stuff, and so that they can really continue to do what they're good at. And also personal growth, leadership, especially for entrepreneurs. I do think also Empathy Circle would be great for people who build businesses. It's a very challenging journey, and I think it would be really helpful. And personal stuff and social stuff as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Louis, do you want to go?
Sure. I have been for 36 years now, a personal trainer and speaker and facilitator in workplace diversity, which is all about relating to one another more empathetically. I don't do legal compliance. I really am trying to maximize the utilization of our human potential by enhancing how we relate in the workplace and value the differences we bring as actual gifts to whatever our common goal is. And that's the very short version of what I do. And yet that applies to personal relationships. So I do personal coaching also. And when I discovered Empathy Circles, what I value most about it is the impact of feeling seen and heard by my opinion, as well as the impact of my ability to see and hear and truly understand another person's perspective. And so the more we can do that, either about political perspectives, which is also one of I've been in politics, and it's one of my greatest passions, is valuing the diversity of our political perspectives in this democracy. And yet I would love to apply this technique not only to our political perspectives, but to any other human issue of any kind, relationship, abortion, guns, anything. Because just the act of listening and hearing one another and feeling heard by one another bridges all of the gaps between us very quickly. So it's that value of the process that brings me here.
Okay. Thank you. Edwin, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I see it's really about wanting to have a sort of a cultural transformation. It seems to me that really building a more empathic society, that actually a global, countrywide global society that values empathy would just really contribute to overall human well-being. So I have visions of grandeur that we can change all of society, and that the gateway, a real, easy, the most effective gateway practice that I know of is active listening and mutual active listening, which is what the Empathy Circle is about. So I just see that this practice is a really good gateway practice to all the other, practices that are out there. There's so many other tools for fostering connection and well-being. So I just, that's why I want to facilitate, learn to deepen my facilitation. And then also is topics that I used to be pretty indifferent to politics, didn't care about politics. I got my own life to live. I've just seen the importance of politics in, everyday life. And I see that, so the topics of politics, I just see as sort of also a gateway to bring empathy into the society. So I'm not crazy about, the topic of politics, but I just see the importance of it as a gateway. And also another topic is sort of emotional topics like fear. I've been really wanting to explore the nature of fear and go using empathy circles to go into it. So all topics, politics for the effectiveness of, moving and creating an empathy movement, and for kind of personal growth, some topics like fear. That's
okay. I feel kind of, when I think about why I want to, it's mainly to practice. I guess I don't, I think I definitely see the value in it, but it's mainly to give me more, so I get better skills at it. And I do like sharing it with others as well. And I'd say my topics are mainly personal growth or social issues. So, okay, Edwin, do you want to go to so that's wrapping up our on arrival question. Let's go to what we're going to do today. Oops. So just to give you a quick overview of today, we're going to talk first and some discussion about the facilitator roles and activities, challenges and solutions, and then we're going to get into an empathic listening round related to our own hot buttons. We're going to do a role play, and then another empathic listening round related to concerns. So that's just kind of an overview. And then this, it's kind of like, is it empathy circle? Is it really a facilitator or is it a host? And it's a question that comes up. And I think it's good to talk about it with everyone. So if you get a question about it, you have an idea of how to answer it. And one reason there's confusion about it is because usually when you think of a facilitator for a meeting or a workshop, they have a lot heavier hand in facilitation. And it's much more hands-on, and sometimes it's a stronger facilitation technique, and that's often what we think of when we think of facilitator. Whereas a facilitator of an empathy circle, it's a little different. As Edwin likes to say, it's with a light touch. So it's a much softer facilitation style than you would have for a meeting or a workshop. And then I just wanted to show you, when you see these two definitions up here of what a facilitator is and what a host is, it's pretty clear that the facilitator is what a facilitator of an empathy circle is doing. They're really helping make sure that the process is easy and that everyone understands it. And I just wanted, before we got into it, you can go ahead and put us back on the screen, Edwin, or for our faces. I just wanted to know if anyone has any questions about that or any comments.
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate that you so simply distinguished between those two words, because it helps make it feel safe. Because I think we are mostly just hosts, and we only need to facilitate when facilitation is necessary. That's the way I would word it,
Yeah.
So.
And this is not what I said to, isn't like, confirm, I wanted to bring it up today, and it's something we're still kind of talking through.
I think you said it well.
Oh, thank you.
I do too. I agree. And I know there's organizations like Art of Hosting that use the word hosting, and we're still working out different naming conventions. So I really appreciate you kind of bringing that up.
Okay. So do you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, Edwin? So there's actually 3 facilitator roles in empathy circles, and you might be kind of surprised to think there's 3. But there's the number 1 on the list is the empathy circle facilitator, which is kind of like what Edwin's doing. Well, I guess I kind of am too, but it's for the small groups, less than 6 people. And so that's one facilitator. Another facilitator, another role, you could be the facilitator at an empathy cafe. And an empathy cafe is for a lot more people, more than 6, and the people break out into smaller groups. And each of those small groups has an empathy circle, has a facilitator, which I'll tell you more about that. But the Empathy Cafe facilitator kind of oversees that big group. And then there's also a co-facilitator. And I'll get into that in just a second. I'll talk more about their roles. So let's go ahead and go to the next one, Edwin. So, and I also don't want to be talking a whole bunch here.
Can I just make one comment?
Yeah.
A very small comment on the slide you just did. I'm very grateful that you listed less than or equal to 6 people instead of it has to be 4. Because I think 5 and 6 works just as well. I almost like it better because we have enough time to be intimate enough to cover all of us instead of it just being back and forth among 4 of us. But I'm just glad you said that.
Okay, good.
And I'm also glad you talked about the possibility of doing them in person. And I'm also glad you mentioned the option of co-facilitator, because it reminds me that, as we discussed last time, the benefit of co-facilitation, even though it's not necessary, is that sometimes there's technical skills needed, and some of us are really good at the interpersonal aspect and not so good at the technical, I speaking being one of them, and others can do both easily. So it's worth noticing that that's one of the gifts. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Louis. The Empathy Circle facilitator, their main roles is to help the circle follow the empathic listening process so everyone feels heard. That's why everyone is there, and that's really the main role. There may be other things they do. I mean, you typically, you welcome and monitor time and describe the process and introduce the topic, and you facilitate the empathic listening rounds. But really, the main thing is to help them follow that process. And also, the facilitator may also coach or train if the purpose of the empathy circle is to improve skills. For example, there might be a group of people who want to get better at their empathic listening. And if that's the intent of it, then the value of having the facilitator, they can coach you on maybe how to reflect better. And then another point about the Empathy Circle facilitator, they may also be a participant, and they may also be the organizer or the producer of the Empathy Circle. And I haven't talked, the organizer producer is, we haven't quite figured how to fit that into this yet, but it's kind of, that's where you decide where you're going to have the Empathy Circle, when you're going to have it, who's going to be there, and all of that. That's their role.
It seems like it's a whole topic of its own, because I do a lot of producing, and it's a huge amount of work, and it's a big, and so it seems like it's almost like a whole meeting of its own to kind of explore that.
Yeah, we'll have to figure out if we put that on as another training, as another session. So also, I still will go ahead and go to the next slide, because I kind of want to go through the Empathy Circle facilitator, the Empathy Cafe facilitator, and the co. But if you guys have any questions about them while I'm going through them right now, please go ahead and ask. So once again, the main role of the Empathy Cafe facilitator is making sure about following the empathic listening process. And one way they do that is by having co-facilitators for the breakout groups. You can kind of get by without having co-facilitators for the breakout groups, but it's a lot more effective, because that's really what we want to do in those breakout groups. The activities that the Empathy Cafe facilitator does is generally the same as what the Empathy Circle does. And they also may be a participant, an organizer, producer, and a facilitator of the breakout group. So we'll go ahead and go to the next one. and then we'll stop for a second. The co-facilitator, in an empathy circle, the main role is really just to help and support the facilitator as needed, monitoring time, taking notes. It's a joint, they just talk with each other and figure out what else needs to be done. But the main role for the co-facilitator in the Empathy Cafe is a pretty different, because they're actually facilitating the small breakout group. And so it's a lot bigger role in the cafe than it is in the circle. And the co-facilitator may also serve as a participant and organizer or producer. So Edwin, let's come back to our face-to-face. So does anyone have any questions?
Sorry, yes, Ingrid, on that one slide you just showed is the perfect place to add among the things the co-facilitator might do is what I said before. You might do the technical aspects of helping to shift it into small groups if necessary, or even signing up. And you just might do the technical aspects while the facilitator doesn't have to do that.
Right, okay.
And it's not necessary, it's just a gift. Some of us can do both, but since as I said before, they come from different parts of the brain. You know, when I'm facilitating interacting with you, and then I have to go, oh, excuse me, let me work on this for a minute. The energy just got shifted. That's all.
Yeah. I guess there's that a confusion we're going to have to figure out at some point, because we're kind of calling the organizer, producer person, the person who does the technical stuff.
Yeah, if she or he is there in it,
Right.
That's true. Right.
And if they're not, then the co-facilitator, I guess, might do that.
Right.
So we may have to change things around there a little bit.
Okay.
I think we're still working on some of the naming conventions. Like in the empathy circle, if there's breakout rooms, I've been calling the people who facilitate facilitators in the breakout rooms. And the co-facilitator would be sort of a support in the room with the facilitator. And then all these terms kind of overlap too, right? You can be doing, it's not like cut and dry roles, so they kind of overlap as well, yeah.
So we have a slide here, or let's go ahead and go, I'm just going to ask it here instead of putting up the slide. But when you think about what activities, and we're defining facilitator as it's not the person organizing the empathy circle. We're kind of defining it as someone else has done all that. I'm just showing up and facilitating. Okay. So what do you think the facilitator needs to do before an empathy? We're talking about like what activities would they need to do before they facilitate an empathy circle or cafe? For example, because we're kind of making a list of things, but so for example, they need to be prepared. I mean, they need to know what the topic's going to be. They need to know things like that. But so what do you think a facilitator needs to do before they facilitate one? It's just kind of throwing things out right now.
You mean like creating an agenda, for example?
Yep, creating an agenda. Yep.
I think kind of setting up the room so that you kind of know how people will be sitting there or whatever. So setting up the room.
So like if you do it in person?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay, what are some other things?
Well, we online, I'd say making sure you understand a bit of the tool you're using.
The tool, the computer, the technology?
Yeah.
Louis, were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, first, what Jessica said, at least get on early enough so that you can find out if the lighting is correct, etc. So you don't have to do that once you're on, right? But then the other one I was going to say more about the agenda is you not only have to know what the topic is, but unless you're willing to go in without any questions already prepared, it's useful to at least have one question to get it started. And it's wise, it's not necessary, but in living room conversations, we have 4 or 5 questions set up, and we go around and have everybody answer each one. I'm not saying you have to match that, but at least by having a question or 2 or 3 in mind is part of being ready to facilitate and lead the discussion one way or another. So at least the first question you should know. Yeah. Even if it's very generic, you know, how do you feel about whatever?
Does anyone else have any other, the purpose of this is, to talk about this during the facilitation training is for people to bring their own perspective of, it's not so much for us to say, these are things you need to be doing before, during, and after. It's more for the participants to think about what they've noticed and what they think they'd like to do before, during, and after. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay. So what about, I start getting worried a little bit about time. And what about during? But what do you think an activity the facilitator needs to be doing during the session?
This is going a bit back to the before. It's also during, is to have a sense of groundedness. And I haven't been doing it so much with the current cafes, but like for really difficult mediation type of, where, you know, it's going to be contentious, is to have a pre-circle, like a facilitator, maybe with a co-facilitator, and have a session where I just get heard empathically myself about any kind of anxieties or struggles or concerns I might have going in. So getting a little bit of an empathy bath before, so that when I'm in the circle during, to be a bit more grounded.
And that reminds me of 2 things. One, the facilitator absolutely needs to pay attention to the clock, because rather than being a controlling nuisance, I think it's very useful for people to know that we really are only allowing 3 minutes or 4 or 5 minutes per answer, and you will be given a signal. I think that helps them feel in safe territory, sort of. And it's also necessary to keep control, to keep it balanced, okay? And then, Edwin, you just reminded me, I think it's worth it, unless everybody on the screen has already done several of these, to have an example of how it works by actually beginning, as Edwin, you once did the first time I did this. Say, I, the facilitator, instead of being last, I'm not imposing myself, I actually want to do one of them. So can I pick you, Ingrid, to be the listener while I speak, or can I be the listener while you speak? I don't think it matters which, but it's just, in fact, maybe it's better if it's the latter. Let me be the listener while you speak to hear back, and that's what we're trying to do. And then it can go around. So that might, unless you have a different opinion, that might be wise.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful. It's kind of modeling. That's kind of one thing, and it's somewhere here, I think, but it's like one of the main things a facilitator does is they kind of model empathic listening for the group. So if there, is there anything else, like when you think about, and after the facilitation, you can say whether it's before, during, or after, but just kind of something really important. Do you have any other comments?
I like that you clarified, Ingrid, at first, you know, the difference between facilitator and host, and specify that the purpose of an empathy circle, which is a bit more than just the topic. So I like that before the facilitator can really make sure everybody understand what is the purpose of this empathy circle. And in the preparation to prepare, I would say it's the facilitator role to maybe create the promotional material, but I don't know, maybe this is something that it might be more for the organizer or producer, but I think it's good to have something prepared, and then that the facilitator also does the promotional stuff, to invite the friends and stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I was thinking about is, whether it's the beginning or the end or both, is to just, I guess, thank people for being involved, and maybe discussing confidentiality and whether or not people feel comfortable with what they've said being shared outside of the circle. And again, at the end, just maybe reinforcing that and saying that, what kind of happens in the circle should stay within the circle, at least not be attributed to particular parties. So just to maintain some safety and comfort with the process.
Yeah, that's kind of similar, I guess, to how you tell people when you're going to record it, Edwin. You always let them know ahead of time and get kind of permission about that. So does anyone else, we're going to go on to, and things about before, during, and after are probably going to come up throughout the next few things we're going to talk about. So can you go to the next slide, please? So these are some tips that we've developed for the Empathy Circle facilitator. I'll give you a second just to look at them. And so what I'm realizing is when I look at these tips, they're a little bit similar to what we just talked about with before, during, and after. Mm-hmm. But so we may have to change that a little bit in our presentation. But what what do you think of these tips? What other tips do you have for a facilitator? And the main reason I'm asking you this is because you've been a participant of Empathy Circles, so you have you've seen facilitators in action, and you obviously know kind of what you like that they do, and maybe things you don't like that they do. And so, what are some of the things that they do that you like? I'll say one, which I think Lewis already said about having, when Edwin would he would kick something off, and he would model empathic listening and kind of demonstrate for us.
Another one we talked about last time is I like it when the facilitator is able to do what Edwin once did in a very neutral, non-judgmental way, is to ask either the speaker, oh, do you feel heard? Or ask the reflector, oh, is there a way you can reflect that in, I don't know, fewer words or more directly or more deeply? The facilitator has to really notice when it's appropriate to do that at all instead of not at all, because ideally it wouldn't be necessary. But so I should have said that should only happen when you can feel that there's some negative energy going on between the speaker and the reflector, or two hands not clapping, some feeling that can benefit from some facilitation. That's all. But that's a very subtle nuance that a good facilitator in this would be able to do, and Edwin has done that several times.
Are you saying, Lewis, that even if the purpose of the Empathy Circle is not to be coached?
Yeah, this is great. This is brought up what we talked about last time. And so the ideal is if nothing's necessary because it's working, let it be go. Then if either you can tell the speaker is not feeling heard, and doesn't herself or himself know how to tell that to the reflector, that the facilitator might be able to jump in and very gently either suggest that reflector might try it again in a little shorter way or something. But that should be very minor and limited to when it feels appropriate and needed. But thank you, Jessica, for asking that, because just like we discussed last time, either definitely often, all too often, and you might have felt last time you were afraid you did, but I all too often would have thought, oh, here's a suggestion I have, either thinking I'm being very helpful to make the speaker feel even better heard, in which case I think it was you, Nancy, who once appropriately pointed back to me, well, that's not quite what I said. So yes, this facilitator should not become a trainer or a speaker or a coach, but only a very subtly nuanced facilitator of making the listener, the speaker feel heard, and the reflector doing a good job of hearing and mirroring back. That's all.
Yeah, there's other processes like restorative circles that uses the same process that is really geared more to any size group as well as to, pretty deep conflict. And the facilitator there will, if the speaker does not feel like they're heard, if there's something that's just missing, if they're just, the listener is just not getting, is the facilitator says, oh, I was also hearing this piece. So the whole point is for the speaker to feel like they've been heard. Somebody heard them. Those are kind of subtle, when to step in is a bit of an art there. And the other part would be the technology too, is one thing with really contentious circles is if the technology is not working, if the audio is a problem, if the connection, people's video is freezing, all those technical things can really add to the stress level if people are already really stressed. And then you got technical stress on it, then that just adds another level. So, maybe even some way of, being really in advance, being sure that if it's a really contentious circle, to make sure the technology is going to work really well. In fact, the first circle I did with contention was with Joan Blades and another liberal and two conservatives, and we had all kinds of different technical issues, which really kind of was a problem. So maybe a primer on, somebody had mentioned having a primer on how to use Zoom and stuff. So anyway, just throwing that out.
So I would like a little clarity on this. When is it appropriate for a facilitator to step in and say something? And I think what I heard, I know one thing we've said is all along is that it's really the speaker's responsibility. We try to teach that it's the speaker's responsibility to say back, I'm not being heard, or whatever it is. They're supposed to guide the listener. And I think what I heard Lewis say is that if you see, though, that the speaker's not being heard and that the listener isn't quite getting it, that it have the facilitator can say something very subtle to help that speaker feel heard. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, it was if the speaker is saying a couple things, maybe they're saying something about a deep anxiety that they're having, like, oh, I feel this anxiety. The listener is reflecting back, but they're not saying that core feeling, and there's a sense of real frustration with the speaker. They're just not being heard. They're just like, oh, I kind of give up. you can sort of step in just to help the speaker feel heard. Is, oh, I'm also hearing that you're feeling some anxiety about this topic. And they'll say, yes, that's it. It's like, but that's kind of like the last resort. At least different people might have different facilitators might have different skills in terms of when to say it and how to say it. But if it's just a real struggle that they're having and they just, might step in. So it's not a hard and fast rule. It's more of a kind of a art, I guess.
Well, in fact, Edwin, you just modeled a good example of, and it helped me, thank you, of it. And so I'm not going to exaggerate to say it definitely should ideally only be, wow, Ingrid, I also heard this. Is that true? I mean, I want you to feel really heard and something like that, instead of going, Nancy, I don't think you heard her at all. You ought to try this, So I was extreme on purpose. So you don't attack the facilitator, but the facilitator might learn if the facilitator comes in such a gentle way that it helps the facilitator learn from that and pick up and do it a little better next time. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Edwin.
And the sense of giving sort of giving a lesson or insight. I kind of have things like, oh, the group needs to know this, but I'll wait until it's my turn and then say it out to someone and get a reflection of that. So the teaching, the sharing of some kind of a group insight happens within the structure as well. So that's like another thing to just show kind of, the importance of staying within the structure as much as possible.
I think this is a great tip that can be added in grid, actually, what just Edwin said. I think it's a great idea that as the facilitator, you might decide not to say anything and wait when it's your turn, and then address something from the group. Or not address something from the group, but share, I guess, something as a facilitator that, oh, I hope like everybody's been feeling heard or whatever. I don't know. And then that stays in the group. I like that idea.
Yeah. Okay.
Even though I'm not feeling still fully clear on like the when, I understand it's not a cut and paste kind of like thing. It's as we practice, right? Like that. Because if the idea is really for the speaker, to be encouraged and to be taught to give a feedback to the listener, how do we do that as the facilitator if this is light touch and we don't say anything during the circle? So I don't see how someone can be taught to do something if there's no teaching involved. Or when the teaching is just by doing it, and then it's just hopefully they will pick up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and Edwin, sorry, go.
Just when I am talking and the listener doesn't quite get me, I'll repeat it in a different way, or I'll try a little different technique or something, so then maybe they can get it. But it still doesn't mean they'll always reflect in a way that I really feel heard.
And I want to add two things. One, I just said that I hope would work, and that is, but again, I'll simplify it to try to separate these two. If we feel that the listener isn't really listening and isn't doing a very good job of it, then she or he might be a person who isn't very open to getting the feedback about how they're not doing very well. And therefore, that's the best time not to comment to them, but to do what we just said and Edwin just modeled. Wow, Ingrid, I think I also heard this. Does that help? Just as a facilitator, I want to add that. And maybe the listener will learn from that. Okay, that's one point. The other point is, which Edwin did once with me, and that is if you sense or trust that the listener is capable of listening to feedback about themselves and actually taking it in, which is a risk, but if you sense that they're open for that, then I think it is okay to gently offer it to them, as Edwin has done with me and as Nancy has done and other speakers have done. I need it and I welcome it.
And you're talking about the feedback loops, so not the facilitator intervening.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
I'm talking about there are people who are not open to feedback that feels like you're invading them, and there are other people who are totally open to feedback that feels like constructive teaching and thank you, I need the learning. You know, and that takes a lot of subtlety for you to already have enough evidence to dare do that. And if you don't have it, don't take the risk. Just instead do what Edwin said. Talk about, wow, did I hear this or this? And hope the other person learns. That's my only thought.
Well, I think you understand you clarifying the example that was given before. And I think where I'm still not clear is, I think maybe we just said that, or it was before, I'm not sure. If we want, not if, we do want the speaker's responsibility. We want the speaker to be able to give the feedback to the listener if they're not feeling heard, because the purpose is to feel heard. And we are saying, if this is the speaker's responsibility to do that, a lot of people are not comfortable giving feedback to the listener. And then my question is, the thing is, we've been saying the facilitator role is to host the space, to hold the space, but to not coach. Like the basic empathy circle is to really let the process, you know, follow its course. But how can I help as a facilitator, the speaker? How can I help them and encourage them to give feedback if they don't even know how to, or don't feel comfortable to? Since we're one side, we're saying the facilitator is not to be giving any guidance or coaching. I get that now. And at the same time, we say this is the speaker's responsibility to say, no, I'm not really feeling heard. Is there any learning there, or it's just on average? Maybe Edwin, you can share your experience. Like on average, people do give their feedback naturally. Like this is where you can. Do you understand the gap?
Yeah, it's like how if you want the speaker to grow in terms of getting the feedback that they want, how do we support the speaker in getting the feedback that they're to be heard the way that they want to be heard? Because they might just say, oh, okay, I don't feel really heard, but I'll just kind of move forward, anyway, or like they didn't really get me, but who cares, that. I just feel dissatisfied. So there's a couple of things that are coming to mind. One is maybe we can have a primer, like a little video primer for the speaker to say, hey, this is an issue that kind of comes up, and give them some tips, right, on how to get heard the way you want to be heard. So that could be something we could create. So in advance, it's like, here's some challenges you may have. Someone may speak and not really hear you. What can you do? There's another thing that I don't think I spoke to you, Louis, about you not listening. I think what happens sometimes, most people would just say, oh, I feel heard, and they'll kind of say it. But we had that one time with David Carson, the person on the right, and he was starting to throw a lot of his own stuff into it. And there was a person on the left, she had some facilitation, empathy, and she just caught him. But she didn't she just said, I don't know, I just don't feel right because I don't really feel like I'm heard. I'm kind of struggling with not feeling heard. And she did it perfect, like within the process itself, sharing her own feelings about it. And then it turned into part of the dialogue. And then at the end, it was David Carson said, oh, I'm sorry, I was throwing my own stuff in there. And it was like he really learned, what it meant to, have your own stuff in there. So it was the speaker who just told her own suffering, her own pain of not being heard, and also her struggle of not knowing how to express that and, how to say it, And so she was just totally just honest about it, which could have been, I know that Jessica with Evan, you know, he was reflecting you, and then you sort of stepped out of the role, and to kind of give you some advice, one thing is you could have just said, I just don't really feel heard. You know, I'm just wanting to be heard, feel heard more deeply. And then he would have said, oh, I'm hearing you're wanting to be heard more deeply. And then sort of sharing your own sort of pain or whatever of not being heard deeply the way you wanted to be heard. So that would have been a way, I think, to maybe to have addressed that. And maybe we need that primer for people to kind of help them, like how to be a really good speaker to get heard the way you want to be heard.
Well, I find, thank you for clarifying that, and I love the two ideas, and that this person's talking about their own pain. I like that we in the, but I, oh no, sorry, so many thoughts coming up to me. You're talking about the primer, the video, and putting it in the tip in the facilitation training, that what kind of challenges as a speaker you might have. You might not feel fully heard, and then kind of like guiding them then how to give a feedback and say, I'm not fully heard. And your other example about sharing your own pain as the speaker, to say really like, I'm trying to express myself, I'm not fully heard, I'm struggling with being fully heard. And then the listener really like was able to learn deeply. And in the example that I had with Evan, I think it's, I don't know if this is relevant there, because I was not feeling unheard or like it was okay, but it was just basic. And I saw, I really thought it was more like a learning thing of try to go beyond just what I just said and guess my feelings and my needs behind it. So it's not that I was not feeling heard. I wanted to go deeper, and I wanted the listener to go deeper. And so, yes, I did step out of my role of and facilitate and coached. But I asked his permission first. I want to make sure I did not impose myself completely. But for me, that's a great example as well, where I guess I'm trusting what people say to me. And if I ask, is that okay? I'm hearing maybe an opportunity for a growth here, and I have an idea, and I'd like to challenge you. Is it okay if I share what I'm thinking right now? I'm expecting the person to say yes or no, and if they say yes, I trust them. So I am dealing with that mistake. I'm learning from that. But I think in really the example I wanted to hear is what Edwin you said about helping a speaker to give a feedback, and it sounds like you're telling me it's not maybe a place to do it during the circle as a facilitator.
Well, you could,
so hold on a second. So I'm getting, you can go ahead and answer, but I do want to kind of wrap this up pretty quick so we can continue and we can get in some empathic listening today. So go ahead and finish. You can answer, go ahead and answer a question. I'm just kind of aware of time.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. So it was the way it's in that example, it was stepping out of the process, and we always want to stay in the process as much as possible. So the ways of dealing with that would have been to say, one, within the process, say whatever you wanted to say, and then Evan could have reflected back to you. That would have been one thing. It would have stayed within the process. The second thing is Evan jumped out of the process too, and he didn't reflect you. If you said, "Oh, I want to say this to you," he could have said, "What I'm hearing is you really want to say something to me, right?" So he could have reflected you, and the sort of the advice or the help that you were giving, he could have just reflected that too. So he stepped out of the process as well at that point. So I don't know if that's making sense, but it's like both people stepped out of the process.
So I'm glad that you're clarifying the stay in the process, even for the facilitator, which I think for me is huge, because I did not think I was outside the process by intervening as a facilitator, because for me, I was like going deeper in the process. And now I'm hearing, oh wow, by taking out myself as the participant, which sounds like being a participant, even your facilitator is more important than being the facilitator, and stepping and guiding someone or whatever as a facilitator is being out of the process. That's I had not seen from that angle at all. So that's very important. I think that in the training, maybe we are very clear on that, because I was not clear on that in almost a year now that I've been doing that. So I'm glad we're clarifying that now.
Okay. You can also have them do the speaker training that we have with that we've written with your group. You know, if you have a group where they have issues, there's a person you can have a session and do the speaker training where we talk about where it's the speaker's responsibility to communicate to them. So Edwin, let's go to the next slide. It's what might a facilitator experience? Oh, you know what? It's a little after 2. I'm just going to stand up for us, for 10 seconds and and stretch or move a little bit. Okay. So this lists what a facilitator might experience during an empathy circle. And it just says basically a variety of feelings. And Edwin, I don't know, since you've had the most, or anyone really who wants to talk a little bit, I don't want to spend very much time on this, but I do want to hear from a couple of you about what feelings that you've had or what you've experienced when you've been facilitating.
I feel like I just talked a bunch. If somebody else wants to talk.
Jessica, and I know Nancy hasn't done one, so Jessica or Lewis, is there anything you want to say about what your experience has been?
Well, the biggest right now is like, well, you know, sometimes as a facilitator, you're going to make a big mistakes and you need to learn from it.
I guess I want to say something that's sort of is a repeat or a summary of what I've already said and what just happened in the other conversation Jessica just had, and that is I think as a facilitator, not only have I felt not always certain, but I know it's my job or my opportunity to try to be sensitive enough to notice when is the right time to say anything, okay? So I can imagine there is a right time to ask that listener, are you open to some feedback now? Or would that change the energy in a way that gets out of you know, the process? And there's a wrong time to do that when that's, okay, that's all. I don't want to make it a rule. I wouldn't want to make it a rule for myself. I would want to be so sensitive to notice it's the perfect time. And what Jessica did was perfectly received by everybody. And she loved it because she's a great facilitator. And there'd be other moments, and I've had that experience, and I love it when that works. It's like being a great coach and a great facilitator. But I've had other ones where what I did didn't work, and I needed to learn that. So that's the main experience I want to share, is that instead of it being a rule, it's what's needed is a consciousness and an awareness about what's the right balance, and to learn from when we miss a little bit. That's called growing.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to? It almost sounds like it's like a continuum. You know, there's some really, you can feel really a sense of satisfaction when everything's going really well, or you can feel really a lot of anxiety if there's a lot of conflict, and you're not comfortable with the conflict or something like that.
One thing I would just add, from the human-centered design community, they have a approach like fail early, fail often, you'll succeed faster. And celebrate your failures. It's like they have in their workshops. It's like they do some activities where you fail and then you celebrate your failure. Yay, we failed. This is great. Congratulations, you failed. Because unless you try and fail and things don't work, you're not going to grow. So that's I think that's the attitude we have. Is like celebrate any failure if there is such a thing. Not worry about it. Move on.
Yeah. So,
and learn by doing too. Just to add, the empathy circle, we just kind of learn by doing is what one thing that I like. You just jump into it and do it. So, yeah.
So I think what I'd like to do now is because it's like been too much presentation stuff, and the next topic is about challenges, which I want to talk about, but I'm going to go to the next slide, Edwin, and let's do an empathic listening round. So, what are your hot buttons? What really charges? What topic or what happened? What are the things that really get you emotionally charged? And the reason we want to talk about this is because it can really throw you off if you're facilitating. And it helps to have an idea of what yours are. So then if it happens, then you might know more when it's happening. So if someone wants to, we're going into empathic listening. And if someone wants to talk about what their hot buttons are, what their triggers are, what gets you emotionally charged? Does anyone, I know it's kind of out of the blue.
Well, I could go first. Obviously, it's not based on experience as a...
So you'll need to ask someone who are you going to talk with?
Okay.
Who are you going to talk to?
I'll talk to Jessica.
Yes, Nancy.
Hello. So this would not be based on experience as a facilitator of an empathy circle, but more as a mediator. However, I think the issues could be very much the same in an empathy circle. And I think one of my, the hot buttons that I have that I find most difficult or triggering have to do with arrogance.
Wow. Yeah. So you clarifying a bit of the context, that's saying, I don't think you say you don't think that happened in an empathy circle necessarily, but as your experience as a mediator, you are very clear. It sounds like that what really triggers you, like when you hear someone that for you they are arrogant.
Yes, exactly. I think when people come across that way, and it may sound somewhat sexist, and I don't mean for it to do. I just find that it's more often that it's a male who comes across really arrogant and sort of overbearing, I guess, but even more on the arrogant side. And so that it kind of it really puts me off. And if I'm in a position where I'm trying to facilitate a conversation or some communication, then I have to really stop and think about that trigger or that bias that I have, and figure out how I can let that go and keep moving on. So that's sort of one thing that I do when I am faced with that sort of behavior.
Yeah. And what I'm understanding is you're saying in your experience, and you were hoping it would not sound sexist, but your experience is that you faced more arrogant men than arrogant female. And you are also sharing that your way of dealing with that, because you're very clear that this is what's triggering you when it's happening, when you're in a heat of the moment. You are stopping yourself, noticing what's happening, and then trying to let that go and working on letting that go as soon as you realize this is what's happening for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I guess I do feel fully heard on that.
Oh,
Thank you.
great. Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to speak to Ingrid. I think my biggest fear, and I don't know if it is a hot button because I'm afraid of it. And so far I've been very lucky in my facilitations. But someone told me, a great facilitator that I admire a lot, told me that it is normal, and in your facilitation career, you will be attacked personally. You are going to say something, you are going to be something for someone that are going to they're going to be triggered by, you know, what you represent or whatever, and they're going to attack you. And he said, you need to be prepared for that. Like, you can prepare as much as possible, but you need to be aware this is going to happen. So for me, it's something that's always on my mind, and always wondering how I'm going to react when I'm going to be attacked directly, because I can go up angry very fast, and I can lash out very easily if I'm being attacked personally.
So a person that you really respect kind of told you to be prepared. Pretty much, it's going to happen sometime. Someone, while you're facilitating, is going to attack you, and it's like, it's scary. I mean, I heard, you initially said, it was kind of fear, and then you said also it is a hot button for you, because you're concerned about it, and you think that the person who you respect said that that probably you will there's going to be a point where sometime you're going to say something, do something that's going to trigger someone else, and then they're going to personally attack you, and that you should be prepared on how to deal with it. And so you're just kind of curious, wondering, how can I be prepared for this? And you think about it fairly often.
I love that you use the word curiosity, because it's a very, very deep core of value of mine. So I am very curious. And so far, I know physically, I know how it feels like when I'm feeling very triggered, like I'm feeling super hot. I don't shake as much, but I'm really feeling hot, and my breathing stops, like almost, like I'm very shallow breathing. And so I think it's a start to know how physically I react. And one thing I've learned, and I think, Edwin is saying it, you guys saying it in a training, and in NVC, I did an NVC webinar for Facilitator, and same thing, they're saying the same thing. Reflect back when you are being either attacked or you are being triggered yourself, to always, as much as you can, give the empathy that you need for yourself, even in the heat of the moment, and always try to reflect back the person. And because as soon as you reflect back to the person attack or trigger or whatever, you're not on the spot anymore, because what feels triggering is like you think you're on the spot and you're judging someone for putting you on the spot. So this practice of when you feel on the spot. Sorry, it's getting a lot. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you. So you know what it feels like when you're getting triggered, and you have you're grateful for that's a start, that you feel hot and you feel your breath get shallow, and then you're coming up with other ways, finding other ways. Then once I know that, then these are maybe some other tools I have to help me address it. And one of the big ones that you keep hearing is reflect back. And just having that, being able to, if you think of when you get triggered, and that knowing that you can reflect back, that might give you a little bit of sense of safety, or comfort in knowing there's more you can do.
Oh, interesting. Safety and comfort. Yeah, I guess, yeah, it does. Having a strategy of like giving empathy is it's something I'd like to learn as like a go-to thing, that instead of insulting the person back with something, I would just give empathy, and then make sure I do a lot of empathy to myself afterwards, for
Oh,
sure.
that's right.
But I love this idea of like, I can train myself to just give empathy as a first reaction, instead of doing what I was doing when I was a teenager and just, angrily storm out or whatever. I like that strategy better.
Yeah. So you love knowing that you can just give empathy back instead of resorting to the behavior that you did when you were younger, and behavior that you didn't really like. And so it's really nice having that give empathy, and then it will help you not go that other way.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, Edwin, I'll talk with you. Hold on, I gotta go. Okay.
Just a second. Somebody's printing back here. If you could speak to Lewis, and then
Okay.
the printing will be over. It won't be so noisy.
Okay. So Lewis, I'm really enjoying this conversation about our hot buttons. I was kind of curious about how it would go. And to me, it's just hearing both Nancy and Jessica talk. I learned from them, and I appreciate that. So I'll stop there.
I can hear and even feel how good you feel in having this conversation about hot buttons, and that just the feedback, I mean, the internal feeling you're getting listening to both Nancy and Jessica already pleases you. So you're excited about the process that you created yourself. So you're thanking yourself.
Well, and then I felt kind of bad because I realized that there wasn't enough time to think about what are my hot buttons. I threw the question out there, and then you want someone to talk, and unless you've thought about it, you might not know right away what your hot buttons are. And so that gave me some concern because I couldn't think of mine right away.
So I hear that you were a little worried to bring up this topic, that it might make people anxious, that if they felt pressed to come up with a hot button and they haven't thought of it yet, that make them uncomfortable, because you yourself hadn't yet thought of one.
Right. So I think next time I may have to give people a minute or two just to be with themselves, to maybe think of them. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, I hear you're not sure yet, but maybe you want to give people time to think about it.
Right, before they have to talk. And I know one of my hot buttons is when someone says something that's something I totally disagree with. And that's really hard for me. I have to really not go to evaluating or judging them, and instead try to say what Jessica did: empathy.
So here, when somebody comes up with something that you totally disagree with, you feel challenged immediately not to judge or attack them back. You didn't use those words, but not to judge and be reactive, but instead to try to learn how to give them the same empathy that Jessica just said she wants to try to get.
Yes, and that is really a big, to me, a big learning curve. And then one other, that wasn't the right word, but the other thing is when I feel like I'm being attacked, or I feel, and that's not really right because that's blaming someone else, but when I feel I'm being criticized or something like that, then I can do that same thing as Jessica. I can kind of feel the heat sometimes, but if I can allow myself just to give empathy, I can calm down and I can hear what the other person is saying.
So here, another hot button is not just when somebody says something you disagree with, but when they actually are judging you or criticizing you for something. You could feel, of course, insecure internally, but you're feeling that if you can just learn to use this technique of mirroring back what they said and empathize, giving them empathy, that'll help you actually calm down yourself.
Yes.
Great.
I feel fully heard.
Great. Thank you. I guess to be fully inclusive, we need to include Edwin, right? So you get to hear me.
Now it's quiet here.
Well, I could have chosen any of you. I like this process a lot too. Thank you, Ingrid. And I like going almost last because you all helped me nuance it. So my biggest hot button is that when I do diversity training and I feel immediately, either in the whole room or even one-on-one, just a judgment that I am this straight white male who they presume is, of course, the enemy. And that's 90% of the time the response I get, understandably, understanding the history of others who aren't that. So my first response isn't to judge them as being wrong. My first response is to empathetically understand why they feel that way, and yet it still triggers me to feel judged without yet having us together find out to what extent I deserve that feeling, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So far,
I was hearing that you were appreciating going, close to last because it gave you time to think about some things. And the one sort of hot button issue is that when you're giving a presentation around diversity, that in the group that you'll feel a judgment towards you as being a straight white male, and that you have understanding for that, but you're still feeling sort of affected by it. It's like people are judging you, and you have understanding for it, but still you have some, it still kind of bothers you. It's like, why am I not sort of being seen for who I am, or yeah.
Or potentially, at least in part, I am. So the best two examples, the one most uncomfortable and the one most comfortable, are the most uncomfortable one, to take an extreme, is when someone else, like the words that are already been used, is very arrogant and is clear and has their own opinion and is not doing any of their own work to look at their own bias and judgment. So I feel all that judgment, even if I'm 10% of the problem or trigger it, 90% of their reactivity is their own history and their own judgment and their own ism, etc. And it's a lot to have to deal with when somebody isn't involved in looking at their own part of it. Compared to, and so I think instead of waiting, I can say compared to the minute I'm interacting with somebody who's able to share with me a feeling they have based on something I said or did, but they're able to do it in a way that is less judgmental and attacking and just more sharing their own feeling. I can read right away that they're already doing their own work and noticing their own part in it. And sometimes they even own their own part. And that enables me to open and go, wow, thank you. I actually need that feedback. It's a learning I appreciate, and I don't even need to compliment them. That would be righteous. On doing their own work, I can just feel that they are, and I'm so grateful for it. So those are two extremes that I'm constantly, I'm experiencing one or the other every time I go out and do this work. It's my work.
Mm-hmm. So your work is, when you're doing your facilitation, there's sort of two different energies that come at you. One is people being very angry or triggered or upset and sending all that judgment towards you. And it's just like, sounds like it's difficult to kind of take that in, take that energy, work with it, and that you're seeing that they're not really working on themselves, and just sending all that energy towards you. And then there's another approach people have where they share what their felt experience is, so their own honest experience. and they share that with you, and you find that like you're just grateful for the contribution that they are giving you, and that you can really connect with that, then it's a real growing, learning experience for you. So it sounds like maybe you're dealing with both of these energies all the time, and it's still difficult to deal with the negative or the anger being sort of directed at you.
Yeah. And I think in a closing way to summarize all that, it's as if getting the feedback that helps me grow doesn't feel like a negative judgment. It feels like a growth opportunity, because when somebody's able to do that, it's actually a compliment that I can read, that they actually are able to see that I am open enough and trustworthy enough to be able to take that and meet them and be there with them, and they're even willing to receive some. So it's like an ultimate gift, and to see and be seen, and to have it be mutual. While we each grow with each other, it doesn't change that I'm in this body, and I'm one of these, and it doesn't change that I'm an imperfect human and can need some feedback. It's a gift that somebody can see me as safe enough doing the work to be open to that, because that means it takes one to know one. They also are safe enough to be doing their own work and to be looking at their own stuff and to be given the gift of feedback almost as love instead of as judgment. And that's what I love most about this work.
Mm-hmm. So what you really love about this work is this sort of open sharing and the mutual growth that can take place, that if someone's open and sharing, you can be open and sharing. It's a mutual growing experience for both.
Absolutely. I feel very heard. Thank you.
Okay, great. Speak to Nancy. This topic is, I'm just really enjoying it too. I was hearing Ingrid's celebration of it. I want to second that celebration, just hearing everyone's struggles and experiences with facilitation. I'm learning a lot too.
So you're enjoying this topic and recognize and appreciate Ingrid's feelings about it, and it's an enjoyable topic for you.
Yeah, and the thing that comes up for me, the hot button, is I used to have like real difficulty with like public speaking, sort of being in public, and it's like I get sort of anxious, and then when I get anxious, I feel like I'm not. All I see is sort of this fear, and it's like my spontaneous sort of natural arising of feelings that I want to speak to as they arise, they just don't come. And then I even get more kind of anxious because it's like that. And then so that was kind of one aspect.
So you get anxious so one of your hot buttons or triggers is feeling anxious about the process, and you get more anxious when you feel like the words won't come or you can't express what you need to express, and so it seems like it just sort of snowballs, or it escalates in a way to a point where maybe you feel like you're kind of locked up.
Yeah, it's a deer in the headlights kind of. That's the response to fear, right? One response is the freeze part. So I have that little sense of the freezing. So if you just want to reflect that.
So you're actually afraid sometimes in the process, and you're afraid of not saying the right thing, or doing the right thing at the right time, or what seems to you to be the right thing at the right time?
It's more, I was sort of referring to public speaking, I guess facilitation too, that you kind of go into sort of a fear and it kind of escalates, I think. Okay, so it's more the public speaking or presentational part, and you actually have some fear of doing that, and it kind of puts you in sort of a flight or freeze mode. Yeah. Where you kind of just get locked up, and then it just gets worse for you. exactly. And then I start getting very structured, you know, too, to kind of control that. And then that kind of leads to sort of negative consequences as well. So that's sort of, these are some routes that I notice in myself.
So one method for dealing with that is to go really deep into the structure, and you find some security and safety there in really sort of forcing the structure. And yeah, see, and the other, but so I see that as sort of a tendency, and I also see that the empathic approach is sort of the way out of that. So it's to name what it is that's going on, and and trying to get better and better at that. So that's the sort of the skill, you know, the way I'm trying to resolve it. And I was also hearing a lot of what other people are saying here is really the empathy is sort of the way in the facilitation too, to kind of work through a lot of the different issues. It's not only that we're creating this empathic, you know, facilitating an empathy circle, but it's all this personal, you know, self-empathy as well. And so I just saw that sort of echoed by others, and that's what I've been trying to nurture and kind of build on, so in myself. So some of what's resonated with you from some of the other speakers is just the fact that empathy itself, the process of empathy itself, can be very helpful when you get into that sort of anxious mode. And you can look internally and kind of provide empathy for yourself. And then you can also look sort of externally at the structure and how the practice of empathy itself can kind of help everybody and meet the intent of what you're trying to do. And also, if I empathize with myself, it's to also share what it is that I'm noticing, to bring it out into the open, and which helps foster empathy for me as well, for people to kind of connect with me. So it's a whole kind of a empathic dynamic and I'm trying to kind of get better and better at that too. Right, so it's almost an exchange of benefit, because if you can share what's going on with you through sort of the empathic process, then other people can understand and provide you empathy as well. And so there's a little bit of a sort of a circle that goes around, and sort of, well, you know, not empathy circle, but in terms of helping you understand and feel accepted and not judged. So, okay, that's the time. I feel heard.
Oh, shoot.
Is that?
I didn't mean for it.
Oh, was it? Oh, was that Simon? So, I thought, hey, your 5 minutes is up or something.
But it ended up being harsher than what I wanted it to be.
No, I was done with that, but it wasn't. Okay. I was going to end there too. So.
So I think the hot button discussion went fairly well. Good. And now we're gonna go to try a role play again. Not again is because we tested it last time. And the purpose of the role play is for the person doing the facilitating to practice facilitating, and then for everyone else just to learn. And Nancy, I hate to put you, since you're my friend, I feel I can maybe put you on the spot, but everyone else here was involved last week. Would you be willing to role play the facilitator in this? And I'll tell you a little bit what will happen, and then you can say yes or no, okay? So you have to just take your earbuds out for a second. So, because the 3 of us have to talk a little bit, or don't listen to us. Okay. Can you do that?
I can. I'll just go somewhere else, because I'll turn the speaker down. Okay, then you'll have to wave at me when to turn it back up.
Okay, it won't be for very long. It will probably be at like a minute. And then when you come back, it's going to be like you're the facilitator of the empathy circle. Okay. And you don't have to do introductions or anything like that, but you can, you can say for the first speaker or whatever to start.
Okay. Just say I'll be flying by the seat of my pants based on what we've gone through.
Yeah.
Have mercy. Please don't judge. I have a little of Edwin's anxiety right now.
Okay.
All right.
We'll see you in a minute. Okay, since everyone here knows kind of the drill, so we need someone. I prefer not to participate if possible, but we need someone to be the speaker. They can start it off. They can be the first one to talk, and they can talk about anything they want, but keep it very, very short, and maybe forget to select a listener. And then we need a listener who gives a terrible reflection to the speaker. First off, I'm saying these things, but things never pan out the way we set it up. So a speaker talks, forgets to pick someone. The reflective listener gives a terrible reflection. And then you can have the silent person who is kind of the disruptor, who can maybe, if Nancy doesn't pick up that the person hasn't picked someone, they could come in and say something, but they just kind of disrupt. Okay. So do you guys want to each pick a role?
It's easiest for me to be the disruptor again.
Okay.
Speaker.
So Jessica, you'll be the listener?
But I'm assuming you're going to tell her that you are setting this up on purpose to have each of the three people be problems in different ways.
I will.
Okay.
Don't be too hard on her though, okay?
Okay. And I'm hoping we can end by about 2 because I do have another thing I have to do.
So you got 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yep, we'll do that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jessica.
No, that's okay. I'll be the budget.
Okay. And just whatever happens, happens. Do you hear us? We don't hear you.
Okay.
Okay. So I've been advised to let you know that some of us are role playing some things to make it a little bit more difficult. Okay.
All right. So.
And I'm and I guess it's my turn to speak. So I'm really excited about all the stuff that I'm working on, all the different projects right now, and I'm really kind of glad to kind of be able to talk about that. And
Edwin?
Yeah?
Can I just ask who you're speaking to in this?
Oh, yeah, I forgot. Sorry about that. I'm speaking to Jessica.
Sure. Okay, whatever.
Whatever. Well, I feel kind of hurt by that comment. I feel like I'm not really being respected here.
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah. Well, I still don't feel heard. I feel like I'm not being respected here.
Jessica, I'm wondering if maybe you could kind of reflect back to Edwin what he's sharing with you at this moment. Maybe we can start there and then he can kind of dig in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
When you say reflect back, you mean I should mirror physically, or I should cry? What do you mean?
So what I'm talking about is maybe telling us and telling Edwin a little bit about what you just heard him say. He said he felt hurt. What did you hear?
So he said he doesn't feel respected, which is honestly I think he was mean to me, and I think he said, I forgot what he said.
Okay, well, what I said is I just didn't feel like I'm having your full attention, and I'm getting a lot of funny kind of grumpy feeling from you. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I was feeling.
So you're saying you don't want to talk to me?
No, can you just reflect back what you heard me say? Would you just reflect back?
Okay, so let's do this. Jessica, can you just hold on for a minute? So,
okay.
Edwin, how about if you talk to somebody different, and then we can kind of work our way back around. and maybe it'll help Jessica understand kind of a little bit how we do the reflective listening. And
okay, I can do that. I'll speak to Louis then.
Or Jessica, if you want, I can sort of teach you how to better reflect.
Louis, I think what's best in this circumstance is if Edwin talks to you and you reflect back, you're the listener, then I think the modeling might be very helpful. So how about if you just listen to Edwin, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so I'm glad that you're listening, Louis, because usually you're a pretty good listener, and like Jessica, it seemed like a horrible listener.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hear that you recognize I'm a pretty good listener, and Jessica's not, but I'll model for her how to do it. And Jessica, are you there? Yes.
I think we have a time. Do we get the time call here from Ingrid?
Yeah. So, Nancy, what was that like for you?
Well, I'm kind of trying not to laugh, but I know that can be very real, you know. I hope you all feel real bad, but and so they, you know, kind of walking that fine line between interrupting people to stop a non-productive process, being respectful when you've got people who are not being respectful, but trying to kind of get in there so that you can have them stop and kind of come back to the right place. So it's just, yeah, it's definitely difficult.
It's like being a parent, or in moments. I mean,
a large meeting of very angry publics.
Right.
Well, I felt good is when you redirected me to Louis. I felt sort of a relief, and like it felt actually, oh, good, I get to speak to somebody else, and so I actually appreciated it as the.
Well, I did too. Speaker. I got to play the role of a narcissist and take that and help model for Jessica how we should do it. Are we done yet?
Nicely done, Jessica.
I feel very hot. Apparently it works good.
So do you think, Nancy, do you think that is something we should include in the training, or how could we set it up that maybe might make it more comfortable, or maybe where the facilitator would learn more?
So I like what you did, because I think we learn from the most uncomfortable, awkward, difficult circumstances. And if you made it too easy, then I don't think it sticks, and it doesn't, you know. So yeah, I think that's a good, you know, if you have different scenarios like that in that training and it's difficult, I think that's a good thing.
I agree, and especially because we know it's a game. Look at how quickly we can get pretty awful.
Yeah.
That was disconcerting how comfortable you all were in those.
Yeah, exactly.
Enjoying it.
I just like it. I just left the screen.
Well, and I guess the question too is like, I mean, you know, I don't know if there's a better way of handling Jessica. It's hard when you can't get a word in too, you know, so.
Yeah, and that's interesting because being a hard ass, but being told, okay, well, let's pick someone else, felt extremely exclusive. And this is very interesting how, yeah, I was personally touched. Like, I'm not wanted here. Okay, well, I'm leaving then.
I don't know how else to handle a situation like that.
Yeah, no, I don't know how I would have done. I think, Nancy, you kept your voice, like the tone was calm. You were here to Edwin, which I think also I can see that it was like important, you know, for Edwin to be heard. So I don't know, do you feel that you learned something?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, it was validating when Edwin said that he liked what I did. Then I'm concerned about how, you know, you can't armchair quarterback yourself too much, and every situation is a little different. But on how I handled you, very difficult, you know, and not as successful as one would hope. So yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, using that process where you have role plays, I think it's one of the best ways to learn.
You know, it's just brainstorming. I haven't been there, but when it's that awful, it might work to just say, well, maybe Edwin will come back to you. And Jessica, would you like to speak and have someone else listen to you for a moment? That could work.
Hey, I don't want to give up my speaking. It's my turn. God damn it! I'm not about to give up my turn. This is white male, straight white male, racism. It's like that is.
Takes one to know one, right?
I know one thing that Edwin will do in that situation is he would reflect back. So instead of maybe asking Edwin switching, you could have just said, let me reflect back, and then we'll come back and give you another turn or something, possibly.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Great idea.
And I think also as someone who is annoying, to notice out loud, to say out loud, I'm noticing, that you seem agitated or whatever, and reminding me in the circle what's expected, could have helped me in that role.
Yeah, and the agreement that we had before, it was like everybody was out of the role. When we first started, it was an explanation of how things will work, and maybe we can even ask for an agreement. Does this agreement work for everyone? So we can refer back to, well, we have this agreement to use this process.
No, actually, if people haven't done it before, you're correct that an agreement about what the roles are is wise. We just don't need it when we've become used to it.
Yeah.
You're right. It's wise to remember to do that if they're newcomers.
So, there you guys are. So what I've kind of heard about the role play is that it works, and I got anxious thinking of how I was like, I don't know how I would respond to that. And I was just always, you did it so calm and cool and everything.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that. So, okay, it's 5-3. We really didn't finish. We didn't finish all of it, but it's what we did today gave at least me a lot of feedback on what to change in it, and what works as well. And so I know, especially for you guys who were here last week too, it's kind of a repeat, but so I really appreciate your willingness to go through it again.
I got some clarity even better than last time.
Yeah.
You did, Jessica?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So, Edwin, as far as next week, we'd have to have someone. Nancy won't be here, right?
Well, then skip the week if you want.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, we can do that. Skip.
Okay. And I'll reach out to Demetra and kind of find out if she still just kind of see where she's at a little bit.
Yeah, and then sort of need to see what we do with the group too. Like, do we iterate again or add another lesson or so?
Yeah.
I was
Need to
curious
talk
to know,
about
because
that.
you guys say module 1, 4 sessions. So is there going to be a module 2, module
And a module 3 and a module 4. So this is lifelong employment for Ingrid.
Volunteer employment.
Well, I just saw Dave sent the message. He must have just talked with Hewlett Packard. So we'll see what's going on there. Right? Try to see if we can get some funding for all this.
Well, thank you to everyone for coming on today and helping out. I really appreciate it. It means a lot, and it'll help us go in and we'll change this and update it. The biggest one I wanted to talk about was challenges. And what this helped me though is I'm going to restructure that. I'm going to do empathic listening, try to do more empathic listening and have that about the challenges. And I think that will be a good way to bring that in.
Well, we just acted out the biggest challenge You know?
Yeah, I know. And look how solutions came out from that too.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I
we'll
loved
see.
it. Thanks for organizing it and doing all the work with the slideshow and the presentation. I just think it's amazing.
Okay. So we'll see you all.
Okay.
In 2
Bye,
weeks. Thank you.
Jessica. Bye,
Bye.
Nancy.
Bye.
Bye, Edwin.